They thought the old rail car in the forest was empty, forgotten by time and rust. But Garrett Stone's dog stopped cold, smelling something no human could see. Someone had tried to bury the truth before it could be found. Hidden inside that rail car was a story waiting for someone brave enough to listen. This is a tale about instinct, duty, and the signs we ignore too easily. Because sometimes God doesn't shout. He sends a warning on four legs. Tell us where you're watching from, and like and subscribe to Iron Compass Stories for more. The northern Montana forest wore morning light the way a cathedral wore stained glass. Bright, clean, almost holy. Sunlight filtered through towering pines and landed in soft coins on the forest floor. Ferns spread their fronds like green hands, reaching for warmth, and the air smelled of cold water. Pine resin and the faint sweetness of moss that had grown undisturbed for decades. Somewhere beyond the trees, Clearwater Lake flashed silver blue between the trunks, as if the world had tucked a mirror into its pocket and forgotten to hide it. The road was little more than two dirt tracks, overgrown and soft with needles. It looked like a path that hadn't seen visitors in years, maybe longer. Garrett Stone drove slowly, one hand light on the steering wheel, the other resting near the gear shift like a habit he'd never fully put down. He was 43 and built like a promise kept. 6'1", broad-shouldered, compactly strong, no showy muscle, just the kind that came from years of moving with purpose and carrying weight without complaint. His face was all angles and hard edges softened by time. A sharp jawline, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, and a rough, close beard that refused to grow into anything polite. His eyes were a rare storm color, gray-blue, deep-set. Quiet but awake, like they were always listening to the world even when his mouth chose silence. His hair was cut short and practical. Dark brown with early silver at the temples. The kind of cut that didn't ask questions or waste time. His skin was sunbred and weathered, marked by years spent under hard skies. And though he looked calm behind the wheel, calm on Garrett was less peace and more discipline, like a lid kept firmly on a boiling pot. He wore the same outfit he wore almost everywhere now, the uniform of a man who trusted function more than fashion, an olive field jacket with pockets that had known maps and gloves, dark cargo pants, and a red and deep blue plaid flannel shirt underneath that brought an odd warmth to his otherwise quiet palate. His boots were brown leather, scuffed and softened from miles. An old military watch sat on his wrist, its face lightly scratched, as if time itself had taken a swipe at it and failed. A pocket knife rode discreetly in his jacket, and on the passenger seat beside him sat a duffel bag that held everything he owned that still mattered. In the passenger seat sat Diesel. Diesel was a German shepherd with a coat like dusk caught on fire, black saddle over golden tan, short-haired but thick and healthy as if he'd been carved out of sturdy weather. He wasn't bulky, he was balanced. Muscle sat on his frame with the clean economy of an athlete who'd trained for years and never forgotten. His stance, even while seated, carried the quiet authority of a working dog who didn't waste motion. His eyes were the most unnerving part, dark, intelligent, and steady. Not the warm, goofy gaze of a pet expecting treats, but the focused stare of someone taking inventory of the world. Diesel's ears shifted as the truck moved, reading the forest the way Garrett once read rooftops and alleyways. He was disciplined, loyal, and sensitive to things humans pretended not to notice. The change in wind, the wrong kind of silence, the invisible tremor of fear on a person's skin. Garrett glanced at him and let a dry little smile tug one corner of his mouth. "Relax, Sergeant," Garrett said, voice low and rough. "It's a land inspection, not an invasion." Diesel didn't look at him. He looked out the window as if considering whether Garrett had just told the funniest joke of the year. The land had cost Garrett the last of his savings. 30 acres of dense Montana wilderness, cheap because nobody wanted it. Too remote, too quiet, too full of ghosts that the town had stopped talking about years ago. That was exactly why Garrett bought it. He wasn't running. He told himself that every morning. He was looking for quiet, a place where the past couldn't follow, a place where the sound of helicopters stayed in his nightmares and didn't bleed into daylight. He turned onto a narrow dirt track that threaded deeper between trees. The path was soft with needles and damp earth, and the truck's tires crunched through scattered leaves like quiet applause. Then Diesel's posture changed. It was subtle, just a tightening through the shoulders, a slight lift in the head, a pause in the rhythm of his breathing. His ears pricked forward, and his nose tipped toward the windshield, tasting the air as if the world had suddenly delivered a message written in scent. Garrett slowed. "What is it?" he murmured, the humor gone now, replaced by that calm vigilance that used to be his daily bread. Diesel let out a soft sound, almost a whine, but controlled, like he was keeping his voice behind his teeth. Garrett stopped the truck. The forest held its breath. He stepped out. The cool air greeted him like a splash of clean water. Diesel hopped down behind him, landing quietly, already scanning. Garrett adjusted the strap of his pack and moved forward at boots, pressing into the leaf-littered ground. At first, Garrett didn't see it. Then he did. Half hidden behind a curtain of ferns and low branches, a vehicle sat in the woods like a relic left behind by a forgotten god. A rail car. An old freight rail car. Once painted industrial gray, but now speckled with rust, the color of dried blood. Moss sprawled across the roof in thick green mats with little tufts of grass poking up as if the forest had started building a garden on top of it. The side panels were scarred and pitted. Faded numbers stenciled near the base read 447 in blocky weathered paint. Below that, barely visible, a logo, Northern Pacific Rail, 1982. It sat on no tracks. The wheels had sunk into the soil over decades, half buried now, as if the earth had decided to swallow it slowly. Vines clung to the edges, and leaf litter piled against the base like the forest had tucked it in for a long sleep. It looked less like a machine and more like a beached whale. Massive, tired, surrendered to time. Garrett stood still, examining it. He'd seen abandoned things before. Buildings, equipment, even dreams. But the rail car had a strange presence, like it was waiting. Not dead exactly, just sleeping, listening. Garrett exhaled through his nose, letting out a quiet, almost amused breath. "Well," he said, "that's a charming little surprise." Diesel didn't share the joke. The dog moved forward with measured steps, nose low, circling the railcar slowly. He stopped at the door, sniffed along the seam, then shifted to the ground beside the rusted steps. His tail held still, not wagging, not tucked, neutral but alert. Garrett's eyes narrowed. He watched Diesel the way you watched a compass needle when the sky was cloudy. "What do you smell?" Garrett asked. Diesel's head lifted slightly. He didn't bark. He didn't scratch. He simply fixed his gaze on the railcar's broken window, a tension so intense it made Garrett's skin tighten. And then Diesel sat, not casually, firmly, like a soldier taking a knee, like a sentinel planting himself in place. Garrett felt something stir in his chest, a familiar sensation from another life. The moment before a door opened, the moment before you found out if your instincts were wrong. He took a step closer. The railcar's metal skin was pitted and scarred. Rust flaked under the touch of his glove. The air smelled like damp wood and old upholstery, decay mostly, but underneath it faint as a ghost whispers something else. Human. Not fresh, not yesterday, but not ancient either. A layered scent as if someone had been here, left, returned. Like footsteps that never fully stopped coming back. Garrett's mouth went dry. He tried for humor again, because humor was easier than admitting his heart had started to run. "You're telling me this thing's not just a museum exhibit," Garrett muttered to Diesel. Diesel's ears flicked. His eyes never left the window. Garrett didn't touch the door. Not yet. Instead, he pulled his phone and took a few photos from different angles. The front, the sides, the broken window. He zoomed in on the moss-covered roof, the rust patterns, the wheels half sunken into the soil. Old habits, yes, but also respect. If this was a story, he didn't get to barge into it like an uninvited narrator. He crouched, studying the ground. Leaves, mud, pine needles, a few scuffs near the door, but nothing obvious. Still, the soil was damp soft. It held secrets well. Diesel suddenly leaned forward, nose sweeping along the lower edge of the railcar's door. Then his paw came up and scraped once at the earth. Garrett's attention snapped down. "What?" Diesel pawed again, more insistently, digging through leaves. The motion wasn't frantic. It was precise. Garrett shifted closer and brushed aside the leaf litter with his gloved hand. A strip of something emerged. Fabric. Damp and dirty. The color once perhaps blue or gray, but faded now. Threadwork along its edge caught the light. Garrett's breath caught as he cleared it fully. It was a patch, torn from a jacket or a bag, and stitched into the fabric in blocky, sturdy embroidery were letters. Northern Pacific Rail. Frosty Garrett examined it longer than he meant to. Something in him moved, something quiet and old. A bell rang deep inside a submerged place. Frost. A name, a person, someone who'd worn this, someone who'd been here. Garrett swallowed his throat tight, and his mind did what it always did. It tried to make the moment small enough to survive. "Someone really loved their job," he murmured, voice dry, "or hated it enough to leave pieces behind." Diesel looked at him in a way that made the word loved feel like a poor disguise. Garrett tucked the patch into a pocket of his jacket like a piece of evidence, or a token from a myth. He stood eyes scanning the forest around them. The trees were still, too still. Sunlight kept pouring down like nothing was wrong. Birds kept singing as if the world was innocent. And yet Diesel's body remained coiled, his senses pinned to the railcar like a magnet to iron. Garrett found himself remembering another scent long ago, sharp and wrong. Gasoline, smoke, the kind of smell that didn't belong until it did, and then it belonged to tragedy. He pushed the thought away like a man closing a door in a storm. Not today, he told himself. He shifted his weight, took another slow step toward the railcar's entrance, and raised his hand to the door handle. Then stopped again. A part of him wanted to open the door. A larger part of him, the part that had learned the price of curiosity, wanted to mark the location and leave. He compromised. Garrett backed away slightly and keyed his phone, marking the GPS coordinates. He snapped another photo of the door, the patch in his pocket like a stone. He looked at Diesel. "All right," Garrett said softly, voice not joking now. "We don't rush this. We don't play hero. We don't do anything stupid." Diesel remained seated, eyes fixed as if the dog had already signed a contract Garrett hadn't read. Garrett exhaled slowly. He turned, scanning the forest again. And that was when Diesel's head jerked toward the wind. The dog's nostrils flared. Then he sneezed. Sharp, sudden. Garrett froze. Because the wind carried something new across Garrett's face. So faint he might have missed it if Diesel hadn't reacted first. A thin thread of scent that didn't belong with moss and pine. Gasoline, not strong, not close, but present, like a warning whispered from far down the trail. Garrett's humor vanished completely. He gazed at the railcar again, and the rusted beast seemed to stare back with its broken windows like blind eyes. Garrett had come to inspect land, but the forest, it seemed, had decided to inspect him instead. And Diesel, steadfast, unmoving, kept watch as if guarding a truth that wasn't supposed to be found. Garrett didn't leave the forest right away. He stood a few yards back from the railcar, letting distance cool the moment the way a soldier cools a barrel after a long burst. The trees remained calm. Sunlight still generous, as if the world had already moved on from whatever truth the rusted vehicle held. Diesel stayed planted near the steps, posture firm, eyes scanning. No longer curious, but committed. Garrett knew that look. It meant, this place matters. He took out his phone, thumb hovering, then tapped a number he didn't use often but never deleted. "Rachel," he said when the line connected. "I need a ranger." She arrived 35 minutes later in a dust-streaked green pickup that wore its age honestly. Rachel Dawson stepped out with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. Early 30s, average height, lean, but strong in the way that came from hiking miles rather than lifting weights. Her dark hair was tied back in a low ponytail that had clearly been retied more than once that morning, and her skin carried the even tone of someone who worked outdoors year-round. A small scar cut through one eyebrow, old, pale, and unconcerned with vanity. Her uniform was practical. Forest green ranger jacket, utility pants, boots laced tight. A radio clipped to her shoulder murmured softly like the forest had given her its own voice. Her eyes were sharp, not suspicious, just trained. The kind that noticed when something didn't fit and waited patiently for the reason to show itself. She took in the railcar in one long look. "Well," Rachel said, exhaling, "that's not on any of my maps." Garrett gave a small nod. "Didn't think it would be." She glanced at Diesel, who watched her without hostility, but with unmistakable evaluation. Rachel crouched slightly, not reaching for him, letting him decide the terms. "K9, she asked. "Retired," Garrett said. "Still working?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Aren't we all?" She stood and pulled on gloves. "All right," Rachel said. "Let's do this by the book." They approached the rail car together. Up close, the decay told a complicated story. The door was rusted at the hinges, but still functional. Garrett tested it carefully, and with a groan of metal, it swung inward. The interior was dim, the air heavy with damp fabric and rot. But it wasn't the chaos of abandonment Garrett expected. Someone had cleaned, badly, hurriedly, but intentionally. One corner of the floor was noticeably clearer than the rest. An empty tin sat near the far wall, its edges blackened with recent soot. Rachel crouched, running a finger along the inside of the tin. "Still warm," she said. "Within a day." Garrett absorbed that without comment. Diesel moved past them, nose tracing the floor, then stopping near the base of an overturned desk. He lifted a paw and scraped once. Slow, deliberate. Garrett knelt beside him. He peeled back a section of loose flooring, revealing a narrow compartment beneath. Rachel leaned in. "Hidden storage," she said, inside a small plastic case. Waterproof. Sealed tight. Garrett opened it carefully. Papers, maps, handwritten notes, dates from 1998, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, an old analog voice recorder. Rachel's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not camping gear," she said. "No," Garrett agreed. "That's evidence." Rachel pulled the recorder free and turned it over in her hands. "Tape's intact," she said. "Battery's dead, but we can power it externally." Garrett's eyes moved to the papers. Maps of Clearwater Lake, 7 locations marked in red ink. Beside each mark a number. Soil readings, chemical compounds, arsenic, lead, industrial solvents. His stomach tightened. On the back of one map, handwritten in neat block letters, "If you find this, I'm gone. Trust the dog. GS will understand. D. Frost March, 1998. Garrett fixed his gaze on the initials. GS. His initials. But he'd never met anyone named D. Frost. "You know this person?" Rachel asked, watching his face. "No," Garrett said slowly, "but I think my father did." Rachel made a call. Within the hour, they had the recorder, powered and running in her ranger station, a small office tucked into the edge of town. The tape hissed and crackled. Then a voice came through, male, middle age, calm but with an edge of exhaustion. "This is David Frost, railroad engineer, Northern Pacific, March 14th, 1998. Garrett's hand stilled. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. I've been documenting illegal chemical dumping at Clearwater Lake since 1995. Northern Mining Corporation bribed the town council to suppress my reports. I have soil samples, I have photographs, I have signed testimony from workers who were paid to stay silent." A pause, the sound of paper rustling. "I contacted my Navy buddy's son, Garrett Stone. He's young, just finished his service. He'll understand duty. If he finds this, trust the dog. Dogs see what we hide." Garrett felt the floor tilt beneath him. Rachel looked at him sharply. "Your father knew him." Garrett's throat was dry. "My father died in 1999, he said quietly. "Car accident, on his way to Montana." Rachel's expression shifted. "On his way here," Garrett nodded slowly. The pieces fell into place like stones dropped into water. David Frost had called for help. Garrett's father, Garrett Stone Sr., had answered. But he'd never arrived, and David Frost had disappeared, both men gone, within a year of each other. Rachel exhaled slowly. "Someone didn't want this found," she said. "No," Garrett said. "They didn't." They spent the next 2 hours combing through the evidence. The maps were detailed, precise. 7 contamination sites around the lake, each marked with GPS coordinates from 1998. The soil samples were labeled and dated, some still sealed in their original containers. And at the bottom of the case, a photograph, black and white, slightly faded. 2 men standing beside railcar 447. One was older, maybe 50, weathered face, railroad cap, work jacket with the patch Garrett had found. The other was younger, maybe 30, military haircut, Navy uniform. Garrett's breath stopped. He recognized the younger man. It was his father, Garrett Stone Sr. Rachel leaned over his shoulder. "That him?" Garrett nodded, unable to speak. His father had been here, had stood in this exact place, had known David Frost, and someone had made sure neither of them finished what they started. Garrett set the photo down carefully, hands shaking slightly. Diesel moved closer, pressing his shoulder against Garrett's leg. Not for comfort, for grounding. Garrett rested a hand on the dog's head. "All right," he said quietly. "We finish it." Rachel met his gaze. "You sure this town buried this once? They'll bury you too if you push." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Then they better bring a backhoe." The town revealed itself the way old secrets often did, slowly and only when pressed. Timber Falls sat in a shallow valley between pine-covered hills, the kind of place that looked honest at first glance. Main Street ran straight through the center, lined with the brick buildings that wore their age like badges. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a post office with an American flag that never came down, a library that doubled as the town hall, its steps worn smooth by generations of boots, and at the far end of the street, Pearl's Diner. The building was small but sturdy, with a red and white awning that had faded to pink in the sun. Windows lined the front, steamed from the inside, and through them, Garrett could see the shapes of people eating breakfast in comfortable silence. He parked the truck across the street and stepped out. Diesel followed nose, already working the air, cataloging the town in layers Garrett couldn't access. The morning was cool and clean. Somewhere a dog barked, a truck door slammed. Normal sounds, the kind that made you forget people disappeared here. Garrett adjusted his jacket and crossed the street. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and frying potatoes, richy and grounding. The kind of smell that made you believe the world was simpler than it was. 4 booths lined the windows. A counter ran along the back wall, worn smooth by elbows and years. A jukebox sat in the corner, silent but dignified, like it had opinions about modern music and chose to keep them to itself. Behind the counter stood Pearl Abbott. She was in her late 60s, tall for a woman her age, with a frame that had thinned but not weakened. Her gray hair was pulled into a loose bun that never quite stayed neat, and her face held lines earned from both laughter and worry. Her skin was pale but healthy, freckled in places where the sun had always found her. She wore a faded apron dusted with flour and grease, as if it had grown that way. Her eyes were sharp and kind in equal measure. The kind of eyes that could cut through nonsense but still make room for grace. She looked up as Garrett entered, took him in from boots to shoulders to the quiet set of his jaw, then smiled without surprise. "You're not from here," she said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "But you're not lost either." Garrett returned a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" Pearl slid the mug across the counter. "Lost men look around like they're hoping the walls will explain themselves. You look like you're asking questions without speaking." Garrett accepted the coffee. "I had a few questions I was hoping you might answer." Pearl leaned her elbows on the counter. "Depends what kind." Garrett nodded toward the window where the lake glimmered faintly in the distance. "About the woods." That smile faded. "Not entirely, but enough." "Of course it's about the woods," she said softly. "Everything that matters around here eventually is." She glanced at Diesel, who sat neatly near Garrett's boots, eyes scanning the room, but body relaxed. "And who's this handsome officer?" she asked. "Diesel," Garrett said. "He keeps me honest." Pearl hummed approvingly. "Good dogs always do." Garrett waited. He'd learned long ago that silence could be an invitation if you let it breathe. Pearl sighed and straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're asking about David Frost," she said, not looking at him. Garrett's gaze sharpened. "I haven't said a name." "No," Pearl replied, "but you came from the trees with that look, and David's the only name that's been sitting heavy lately." She poured herself a coffee and took a sip before continuing. "David was a railroad engineer. Good man. Too good for a town that likes its evenings predictable. Mid-40s, lean but strong. Walked like someone used to, covering ground. Dark hair he kept short. Skin weathered from being outdoors more than indoors. Eyes always scanning like he was waiting for the world to blink first." Pearl's mouth tightened slightly. "He asked questions about trucks on the back roads, about late-night activity near the lake. Some folks called it curiosity, others called it trouble." "And then he disappeared," Garrett said. Pearl nodded. "Last anyone saw him was March 1998. People said he went hiking or moved on. That's what people say when the alternative makes them uncomfortable." Garrett took a slow drink of coffee. "Did he come here often?" "Every morning," Pearl said. "Same booth, same eggs, black coffee. Tipped too much, like he was apologizing for something he hadn't done yet." She paused, then added, "He talked about his work. Said the railroad was dying, but the land remembered everything. Said if you listened close enough, the forest would tell you what people tried to hide." Garrett felt something click into place. Not a solution, just a shape. He pulled the fabric patch from his pocket and laid it on the counter. Pearl fixed her gaze on it for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched it gently like it was something sacred. "Where did you find this Railcar 447? Garrett said. "On my land." Pearl's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "He loved that railcar," she said quietly. "Called it his field office. Said it was the only place he could think clearly." She looked at Garrett. "You bought the Frost land." Garrett nodded. Pearl smiled, sad but genuine. "Then maybe you were supposed to." Garrett was about to order when Pearl turned to the kitchen. "Breakfast special," she called back. "Eggs, please," Garrett said. A minute later, Pearl returned with a plate. On it sat a hot dog, bun slightly burned, ketchup pre-applied. Garrett blinked. "I ordered eggs." "Kitchen's broken," Pearl said without apology. "This is what you get." Diesel, who'd been sitting patiently, leaned forward and sniffed the hot dog. His nose wrinkled. He turned his head away with slow, deliberate dignity, as if the very existence of the hot dog had personally offended him. Garrett looked at the demig, then at Pearl. "He agrees with me." Pearl laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Smart dog." Before Garrett could respond, the diner door opened. A man stepped inside. Mid-50s, medium height, dressed in work clothes that were too clean for actual work. He carried himself with the careful authority of someone used to being obeyed without needing to raise his voice. His eyes found Garrett immediately. He crossed the diner and extended a hand. Victor Brennan, he said, Timber Ridge Development. Garrett stood and shook the hand, firm grip, practiced smile. Garrett Stone. I know, Victor said. Word travels fast in small towns. Heard you bought the old Frost property. Garrett said nothing. Victor's smile didn't waver. I'm authorized to make you an offer, $250,000. Yes. You walk away clean, no headaches, no history. Not interested. Victor's smile tightened. Mr. Stone, that land has been trouble for everyone who's touched it. David Frost learned that the hard way. Garrett met his eyes. That a threat? A history lesson, Victor said smoothly. Your father made the same mistake. Curiosity killed him too. The air in the diner went still. Garrett's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. My father died in an accident. Did he, Victor asked, or did he die on his way to ask the wrong questions? Pearl's voice cut through the tension. Victor, that's enough. Victor turned to her, smile still in place. Just trying to save the man some grief, Pearl. He looked back at Garrett. Offer stands. Think it over. He left without waiting for a response. The door swung shut behind him. Pearl exhaled slowly. That, she said, is why people stop asking questions. Garrett sat back down, hands steady around his coffee mug. Diesel had shifted position, no longer relaxed, alert, watching the door where Victor had exited. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a bark, not a growl, a warning contained. Garrett rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. Easy, but he understood the message. Diesel had marked Victor Brennan as a threat, and Diesel was never wrong. Pearl leaned forward, voice low. You need to be careful, Garrett. This town has buried a lot of things. It won't hesitate to bury you too. Garrett met her eyes. Then they better dig deep. He paid and stood to leave. As he reached the door, Pearl called after him. David used to say something, she said. He'd say the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs patience. Garrett paused. He was right. Outside the street was quiet. A few trucks passed, normal traffic. Normal day? But Garrett felt eyes on him now. The town had noticed him, and the town was deciding what to do about it. He drove next to the small police station, a modest brick building with a flag out front and a bench worn smooth by waiting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Behind the desk stood Sheriff Frank Holloway. Holloway was a man in his late 50s, tall but slightly stooped, as if years of carrying responsibility had bent him forward by degrees. His face was broad and weathered, with a graying beard kept trimmed out of habit rather than pride. His eyes were brown and tired, but not unkind. They had the look of someone who'd seen enough to know better, and sometimes chose not to. He studied Garrett for a long moment before speaking. You're the guy asking about the woods, Holloway said. Word travels fast, Garrett replied. Only when it wants to, Holloway said. What do you want? Garrett met his gaze squarely. Information about David Frost. Holloway's jaw tightened. Not anger, something closer to resignation. He's gone, Holloway said. No evidence of foul play, no reason to keep digging. Except the rail car, Garrett said evenly, and the maps, and the fact that people who ask questions stopped showing up for breakfast. Holloway leaned back, exhaling through his nose. This town doesn't need outsiders stirring things up. Garrett didn't flinch. I'm not stirring, I'm listening. Holloway's eyes flicked to Diesel, who sat calmly beside Garrett, gaze steady and unreadable. That dog yours? Holloway asked. Yes. Working dog. Always. Holloway's shoulders sagged a fraction. Some silences keep the peace, he said quietly. Garrett's voice was just as quiet. Some silences bury the truth. Holloway said nothing to that. Garrett left without pushing further. Outside, dusk had begun to soften the edges of the world. Lights blinked on in windows. The lake reflected the sky like a held breath. Garrett stood on the steps of the station and pulled out his phone. He called Rachel. I need everything you have on Victor Brennan, he said. Already pulling it. Rachel replied. Meet me at the ranger station in an hour. Garrett pocketed the phone and looked at Diesel. The dog's attention was fixed on something across the street, a dark green pickup idling near the corner. Company logo stenciled on the door, Timber Ridge Development. The driver's face was obscured by shadow, but Garrett felt the weight of the stare. Diesel's body stiffened. He moved closer, nose low, sniffing the air, as the truck idled briefly at the stop sign. Then it accelerated and disappeared down the road. Garrett knelt beside Diesel, resting a hand briefly on the dog's shoulder. What is it? He murmured. Diesel didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the road long after the truck was gone. Garrett straightened. The town had just sent its second message, and this one was clear. We're watching. That night, Garrett sat on the porch of the small cabin he'd rented on the edge of town. It was modest and clean, the kind of place meant for fishermen and weekend hikers. The forest loomed beyond the clearing, patient and dark. Diesel lay beside him, head on his paws, eyes half closed, but alert. Garrett's thoughts drifted backward, to another night, another country, another choice. Afghanistan, 2015. The team had been stacked outside a compound. Intelligence said the building was clear, but the K-9 handler had hesitated. The dog had refused to move forward. Garrett, then a team leader, had overridden the call. Mission clock was ticking. Command was waiting. "We're going in," he'd said. The handler had pulled the dog back. Garrett had breached first. The IED was wired to the door frame. Pressure plate under the threshold. 2 soldiers died instantly. 3 more were wounded. Garrett survived because he'd been standing at an angle. The dog had known. The dog had tried to warn them. And Garrett had ignored it. He'd carried that weight every day since. It was why he'd left the service. Why he'd adopted Diesel. Why he came to places like this looking for quiet he knew he didn't deserve. A soft sound broke his thoughts. A clink. Metal on wood. Garrett's head snapped up. Something lay on the wooden step near the door, a small object catching the porch light. He rose slowly, every sense awake. It was a lighter, plain metal, cold to the touch, and etched into its side a symbol. A wolf. 3 scratch marks beneath it. Diesel stood instantly, placing himself between Garrett and the darkness. A low, controlled sound vibrating in his chest. Garrett closed his fingers around the lighter, feeling its weight. He didn't need a note. The message was clear. "We see you." Garrett looked out toward the trees, eyes hard, breath steady. Behind him, the cabin light hummed softly. Ahead, the forest waited, and somewhere between the two, the truth had begun to follow him home. The next morning, Garrett met Rachel at the ranger station. She had files spread across her desk, maps, photographs, documents marked with yellow tabs. "Victor Brennan," she said, not looking up, "CEO of Timber Ridge Development. On paper, he's clean, community leader, donor to the hospital fund, sponsors the Little League." She slid a photograph across the desk. Victor shaking hands with the mayor. Victor cutting a ribbon at a new school. Victor smiling beside a check for $50,000. "Off paper," Rachel continued, "he owns half the logging contracts in the county, controls most of the land development, and every property he's purchased in the last 20 years has one thing in common." She tapped a map. Red circles marked 7 locations around Clearwater Lake. "They all border the contaminated sites David Frost documented." Garrett leaned forward. "He's been buying the evidence." Rachel nodded. "And anyone who got too close either left town or stopped talking." She pulled another file. "My brother Cole was an environmental activist. He disappeared 5 years ago during a solo hike near the lake. They found his body 3 weeks later. Ruled it an accident." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. He'd been asking about water quality, about cancer rates, about why Northern Mining got permits when their environmental reviews were incomplete. Garrett met her eyes. "You think Brennan was involved?" "I think my brother knew something," Rachel said, "and I think that's why he's dead." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled the lighter from his pocket and set it on the desk. "Someone left this on my porch last night." Rachel examined it closely. "The wolf mark," she said quietly. "That's Brennan's signature. He uses it on his personal property. Says it represents strength and territory. It's a threat." "Yes," Garrett leaned back. "Then we need to move carefully. We document everything. We don't confront. We build a case that can't be buried." Rachel nodded. "Agreed." A voice crackled over the radio on her desk. "All units, we have a report of a missing child. 10-year-old female, last seen near the restricted mining zone north side of Clearwater Lake. Search teams mobilizing." Rachel grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Dawson. I'm en route." She looked at Garrett. "You coming?" Garrett was already standing. Diesel was at the door waiting. They drove in silence, Rachel's truck bouncing over rough forest roads. The restricted zone was marked with faded signs, "No trespassing," "Environmental hazard." The signs were old, ignored, overgrown. A small crowd had gathered near the trailhead. Parents, volunteers, Sheriff Holloway coordinating search grids. Rachel parked and stepped out. "Who's missing?" she asked. A woman stepped forward, face pale with fear. "My daughter Lily. She was playing near the old trail. I looked away for 2 minutes and she was gone." Holloway approached. "We've got teams covering the main trails, but that mining zone is unstable. Old shafts, sinkholes. If she wandered in there, he didn't finish the sentence. Garrett knelt beside Diesel. The dog was already focused, ears forward, body tense. You got a scent article? Garrett asked. The mother handed him a small jacket. Garrett held it to Diesel's nose. Fine. Diesel's nose dropped to the ground. He circled once, twice, then locked onto a direction and pulled. Not toward the main trail, deeper into the restricted zone. Garrett looked at Rachel. He's got something. Rachel grabbed her pack. Let's go. They moved quickly, following Diesel through dense undergrowth. The dog didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. He moved with the precision of a creature who trusted his senses above all else. The forest grew thicker, darker. The ground beneath them shifted from soft earth to loose rock. Then Diesel stopped. He sat. The signal. Garrett moved forward carefully. Ahead, partially hidden by brush, was the entrance to an old mining shaft. The opening was narrow, edges crumbling. A makeshift fence had once blocked it, but the wood had rotted away. Garrett knelt at the edge and looked down. 15 feet below, sitting on a ledge, was a small girl. Lily. She looked up, eyes wide with fear and relief. Help, she said, voice small. Garrett turned to Rachel. I need rope. Rachel was already pulling the ear from her pack. Within minutes, they had a system rigged. Garrett descended first, moving carefully. The shaft walls were unstable. Loose rocks skittered down with every movement. He reached Lily and knelt beside her. Hey, he said softly. I'm Garrett. You're going to be okay. Lily nodded, tears streaking her dirty face. Garrett checked her over, twisted ankle, scratched arms, but alive. He secured a harness around her and called up. Ready to pull. Rachel and two volunteers hauled Lily up slowly, carefully. As Garrett waited, his eyes adjusted to the darkness below, and he saw them. Barrels, dozens of them, stacked against the shaft wall, rusted, leaking, stenciled on the sides. Northern Mining 1984, arsenic compound. Garrett's stomach turned. This wasn't just a contamination site. This was a dumping ground. He pulled out his phone and took photos. The barrels, the labels, the dark liquid seeping into cracks in the rock. Then he climbed. When he emerged, Lily was wrapped in a blanket, her mother sobbing with relief. Diesel sat beside the girl, calm and watchful. Lily reached out and touched the dog's head. Thank you, she whispered. Diesel's tail thumped once. Garrett pulled Rachel aside and showed her the photos. Her face went pale. This is it, she said. This is what David was documenting. Garrett nodded. And it's still here, still poisoning the water. Rachel looked toward the crowd. We need to get this to the EPA, federal level, bypass local authorities. Agreed. But as they turned to leave, Garrett saw someone standing at the edge of the clearing. Victor Brennan, watching. As the crowd celebrated Lily's rescue, Garrett noticed something. Victor Brennan stood at the edge of the clearing, not watching his daughter. He was watching the mine shaft. And on his face, for just a moment, wasn't relief. It was calculation. Garrett pulled Rachel aside. How did Lily know exactly where that shaft was? It's not marked on any trail map. Rachel's face went pale. You think she was sent there? I think, Garrett said slowly. Victor knew we'd come, and he knew we'd find the barrels. Rachel's breath caught. Why would he want us to find them? Garrett looked at the barrels being photographed by the fire marshal. Because those barrels are marked 1984. But look, he showed Rachel a photo on his phone, zoomed in. The serial numbers were sequential, freshly stamped. These aren't from 1984, Garrett said. They're replicas, planted within the last month. Rachel took in the implications. He's framing Northern Mining for contamination that's already been cleaned up. The real evidence is somewhere else. And we just gave him the perfect distraction. Victor approached Lily in his arms. Thank you, Mr. Stone, he said, voice warm. You saved my daughter. Garrett met his eyes. Did I? Victor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. You should be careful in these woods, Victor said quietly. Lightning strikes in the strangest places. He walked away. Rachel grabbed Garrett's arm. That was a threat. No, Garrett said, watching the sky darken. That was a forecast. That evening, Garrett stood outside his cabin, looking at the truck packed with his gear. The photos were uploaded. Rachel had contacts at the EPA. The case would move forward with or without him. He'd done his part. It was time to go. He loaded his duffel into the truck bed, then opened the passenger door. Diesel, load up. Diesel sat on the porch of the cabin, unmoving. Garrett frowned. Diesel, come. The dog didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the forest, on the direction of the railcar. Garrett walked over. We're done here. Time to go. Diesel turned his head and looked at Garrett. Not defiant, not stubborn, certain. Garrett knelt. What do you see, boy? Diesel's gaze shifted back to the forest, and Garrett understood. This wasn't finished. Something was still out there, still hidden. Diesel knew it. And he wouldn't leave until it was found. Garrett closed his eyes and memories flooding back. Afghanistan, the K-9 handler's warning, the door he'd breached anyway. The men who died because he didn't listen. He opened his eyes and looked at Diesel. Okay, Garrett said quietly. We stay. He unpacked the truck. Diesel's tail wagged once, then he stood and walked to Garrett's side, pressing against his leg. Not in relief, in partnership. They walked back into the cabin together. The mission wasn't over, it was just beginning. The sky over Timber Falls had turned the color of old bruises. Gray clouds rolled in from the west heavy, with the promise of something violent. The air smelled wrong, too dry, too sharp, like the world was holding its breath before a scream. Garrett stood outside his cabin, watching the horizon darken. Diesel sat beside him, nose lifted to the wind, reading messages Garrett couldn't access. It had been 3 days since they'd found Lily. 3 days since Garrett had sent the photographs to Rachel's federal contact. 3 days of waiting for something to break. The town had grown quieter, watchful, like it knew a reckoning was coming and was trying to decide which side to stand on. Garrett's phone buzzed. Rachel's voice came through tight and urgent. Lightning strike, North Ridge, fire spreading fast toward the contaminated zone. Garrett's chest tightened. How fast? Forest Service says 2 hours before it reaches the old mining shafts. If those barrels ignite, the toxins will go airborne. 50-mile radius? Maybe more. Garrett closed his eyes. Evacuation. Already started, but Garrett, there's something else. Her voice dropped. Victor Brennan's daughter, Lily. She's missing again. Last seen near the lake collecting samples for a school project. She wanted to help after you saved her. Garrett's jaw tightened. We're East Shore, near the rail car. Garrett didn't hesitate. I'm going. Garrett, the fire is heading that direction. You'll be trapped. Then I better move fast. He ended the call and looked at Diesel. The dog was already standing. Ready. Garrett grabbed his pack, checked the straps, and moved to the truck. Behind them, the sky had turned orange at the edges. Smoke rose in dark columns, twisting like something alive. The forest was coming apart. And somewhere in the middle of it, a little girl was waiting for someone to come. Garrett drove as far as the road allowed, then went on foot. Diesel ranged ahead, nose working the ground tracking scent through the thickening smoke. The air was hot now. Ash fell like snow. The sound of the fire was a distant roar, like a freight train that never stopped. Garrett's lungs burned. His eyes watered. But he kept moving. Diesel stopped suddenly and barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Garrett ran to him. The dog was standing at the edge of a small clearing. Beyond it, partially visible through the haze, was Railcar 447. And sitting on the steps, small and terrified, was Lily. She looked up as Garrett approached, relief flooding her face. Mr. Stone. Garrett knelt beside her. What are you doing out here? I wanted to help, Lily said, voice breaking. I wanted to find more evidence like you did. But then I heard the fire and I got scared, and I couldn't find the way back. Garrett checked her over. No injuries. Just fear. It's okay, he said. We're leaving. Now. He stood and reached for her hand. Then Diesel's head snapped toward the forest. A low growl built in his chest. Not warning, certainty. Garrett turned. Through the smoke, a figure emerged. Victor Brennan. He walked slowly, deliberately, hands in his pockets. His face was calm, almost sad. Mr. Stone, Victor said. I was hoping you'd left by now. Garrett moved Lily behind him. What are you doing here, Brennan? Victor stopped a few yards away. Same thing you are, trying to save what matters. He looked at Lily and something softened in his expression. Hey, sweetheart, you scared me. Your mom's worried sick. Lily hesitated, then took a step toward her father. Garrett didn't move. Victor's eyes shifted back to Garrett. You sent those photos to the EPA, Victor said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Victor nodded slowly. I figured. You're like your father. Stubborn, righteous. Doesn't matter if the whole world burns as long as the truth stands. Garrett's voice was steady. The truth doesn't negotiate. Victor smiled, but there was no humor in it. No, it just leaves scorched earth. He pulled something from his pocket, not a weapon. A folder. He tossed it to the ground between them. Hospital plans, Victor said. New wing, cancer treatment center, funded entirely by Northern Mining as part of their settlement agreement. Opens next month. 200 families will get treatment they couldn't afford otherwise. Garrett examined the folder without picking it up. That settlement was contingent on silence, Victor continued. On burying the contamination reports. On making sure David Frost's evidence never saw daylight. He looked at Garrett. You expose this, the company goes bankrupt. The settlement dies. The hospital closes before it opens. And 200 people lose their chance. Garrett's hands clenched. You're asking me to choose between truth and lives. I'm telling you the choice has already been made, Victor said. This town chose to survive. Your father understood that. That's why he had to die. The words landed like a punch. Garrett's voice came out rough. You killed him. Victor shook his head. I didn't pull the trigger, but I made the call. Your father was coming to help David Frost. I couldn't let that happen. So I called in a favor. State police, routine traffic stop, that went wrong. Brake line cut, accident report filed. Clean. Garrett felt the ground tilt. You murdered him. I saved a town, Victor said, and I'd do it again. Lily was crying now, pressing against Garrett's leg. Victor's expression cracked. Lily Lee, come here. We need to go. But Lily didn't move. Diesel stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and the girl. His teeth were bared now. Not barking, just ready. Victor's jaw tightened. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Stone. Take the girl and go. I'll tell the investigators the fire destroyed the rail car and everything in it. We all walk away. Garrett's voice was cold. No. Victor's face hardened. Then you're as stupid as your father. He turned and started walking toward the forest. Then he stopped and looked back. The fire will reach those barrels in 30 minutes. If you're still here when it does, you'll die trying to save a truth nobody wants. He disappeared into the smoke. Garrett stood frozen for a moment, rage and grief warring inside him. Then Diesel barked. Not at Victor, at the rail car. Garrett turned. Diesel was running toward the vehicle, not away from it. Diesel no, but the dog didn't stop. He disappeared inside the rail car. Garrett cursed and ran after him, pulling Lily with him. Inside, the air was thick and hot. Diesel was at the hidden compartment, digging frantically. Garrett knelt beside him. What is it, boy? What do you see? Diesel's paw scraped at the floor, and Garrett understood. There was more. He pulled up the loose boards. Beneath the first compartment was a second, deeper, sealed with a metal case. Garrett wrenched it open. Inside a waterproof bag, and inside that documents. Not just soil samples. Federal inspection reports. Signed and dated. Proving that the EPA had known about the contamination since 1985 and had accepted bribes to suppress it, names, amounts, bank transfers. This wasn't just local corruption. This was systemic. Garrett examined the papers, understanding flooding through him. David Frost hadn't just been killed to protect a town. He'd been killed to protect a network. And Diesel had known it was here all along. Garrett looked at the dog. You've been guarding this all these years. Diesel's eyes were steady. Garrett shoved the documents into his pack. Then he heard it. A deep rumbling roar. The fire had reached the clearing. Smoke poured through the rail car's broken windows. The heat was overwhelming now. Garrett grabbed Lily and ran. Diesel bolted ahead, leading them toward the lake. Behind them, the forest exploded. Flames consumed the rail car in seconds, metal groaning as it collapsed inward. Garrett ran harder than he'd ever run, Lily in his arms, Diesel streaking ahead through the smoke. They burst out of the tree line onto the lakeshore. The water was black glass, reflecting the inferno behind them. Garrett waded in, pulling Lily with him. The cold water shocked his system, but it was safety. Diesel swam beside them, powerful strokes carrying him through the shallows. They made it 50 yards out before the first barrel exploded. The sound was deafening. A plume of toxic smoke mushroomed into the sky, black and oily. Garrett dove under, pulling Lily with him, holding his breath as the shockwave rolled over the water. When he surfaced, gasping, the shore was an inferno. Everything was burning. The rail car, the forest, the truth David Frost had tried to protect. But Garrett's pack was still sealed. The documents were safe. He looked at Diesel, who was treading water beside him, calm despite the chaos. And then Garrett saw it. A burning branch falling from the sky. It was going to hit Diesel. Garrett didn't think. He lunged, shoved the dog aside. The branch hit him instead, a glancing blow across the shoulder that sent pain lancing down his arm. But Diesel was safe. Garrett surfaced, coughing, vision blurring. Diesel swam to him immediately, positioning himself beside Garrett, letting the man hold on to his harness. Together they made it to the far shore. Fire crews were there, boats, helicopters overhead. Rachel was waiting, pulling them from the water. Garrett, oh my God, you're alive. Garrett collapsed onto the mud lily beside him, shaking but breathing. Diesel stood over them both, water streaming from his coat, eyes scanning for threats. And then Garrett saw him, Victor Brennan, standing at the edge of the fire line watching. Their eyes met across the distance. Victor's expression was unreadable. Then he turned and walked toward a police car where Sheriff Holloway was waiting. Garrett watched as Victor spoke to the sheriff, watched as Holloway's face went pale, watched as Victor handed over something. Keys, documents. And then quietly, Victor Brennan got into the back of the police car. No handcuffs, no drama. Just a man who had run out of moves. Holloway drove away, and the town watched in silence. Rachel knelt beside Garrett. What happened? Garrett pulled the documents from his pack and handed them to her. She read them, eyes widening. This is everything. Federal conspiracy. Names. Proof. Garrett nodded, too exhausted to speak. Rachel looked at Diesel. He found this. He's been guarding it for 25 years, Garrett said quietly. Since my father died. Rachel's breath caught. Your father's dog. Garrett met Diesel's eyes. The dog sat calm and watchful. Mission complete. Yeah, Garrett said. My father's dog. 2 days later, Garrett sat in Dr. Kate Sullivan's veterinary clinic while she examined Diesel's injuries. The dog had a few minor burns on his paws already healing. Nothing serious. Dr. Sullivan ran her hands over Diesel's shoulder, then paused. This dog has old scars, she said. Very old, this pattern here. She pointed to a healed wound on Diesel's shoulder. This is shrapnel, military injury, but the healing pattern suggests this happened decades ago, not recently. Garrett leaned forward. What are you saying? Dr. Sullivan pulled up records on her computer. I ran Diesel's chip. He's registered under your name, adopted 3 years ago from a military K-9 program. But his original registration, she turned the screen. He was registered in 1998 as Sarge, Handler Garrett Stone Sr. Garrett's world stopped. My father, Dr. Sullivan nodded. According to these records, Sarge was retired in 1998 after his handler died. The dog was supposed to be rehomed, but he escaped from the camp and disappeared. She looked at Diesel. Until he showed up at a military K-9 program in 2010, fully trained, no explanation. They re-registered him, trained him further, and eventually he was paired with you in 2021. Garrett's throat was tight. He's been looking for me, for someone to finish what my father started. Dr. Sullivan's voice was gentle. Or he's been waiting to finish it himself. Garrett knelt beside Diesel. The dog looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes. 25 years. 25 years of waiting, guarding, hoping. You never gave up, Garrett whispered. Diesel's tail wagged once. 3 months later, the lake was quiet again. The fire had burned itself out. The EPA had launched a full investigation. Northern mining executives were facing federal charges. The hospital wing had opened anyway, funded by emergency state grants and private donations. Victor Brennan had resigned, quietly accepted a plea deal, and left town. No trial, no spectacle, just gone. Sheriff Holloway had turned state's evidence and was cooperating with investigators. The town was healing, slowly, painfully, but healing. Garrett stood at the lake shore watching the water. It was early morning. The air was clean and cold. Beside him, Diesel sat relaxed but attentive. The dog's shoulder had healed completely. A small scar remained where the branch had grazed him, but he carried it without complaint. Footsteps approached. Sarah Moore, David Frost's niece, joined them. She'd returned to town for the memorial dedication. She stood beside Garrett, now looking at the new plaque mounted on stone where Railcar 447 had stood. It read, David Frost and Garrett Stone Sr. They spoke truth when silence was easier. And beneath it, a second line, the loyal remember what the living forget. He'd be proud, Sarah said quietly. 25 years, and someone finally listened. Garrett nodded. Sarah had taken the federal documents and turned them into a story that ran in every major newspaper. The expose had won awards. But more importantly, it had forced change. You're not staying, Garrett asked. Sarah shook her head. This was his town, not mine. But I'll come back, every year, to remember. She placed flowers at the base of the memorial, then turned to Garrett. Thank you for finishing what he started. I had help, Garrett said, looking at Diesel. Sarah smiled and walked away, shoulders straight, carrying her uncle's legacy forward. Rachel approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. Thought you might need this. Garrett accepted one. They stood in comfortable silence. You staying? Rachel asked eventually. Garrett nodded. For now. Good, Rachel said. Town could use someone who doesn't run. Garrett smiled slightly. Later that afternoon, there was a small ceremony at the memorial. Pearl Abbott was there, Sheriff Holloway looking older but lighter, a few townspeople who'd finally found their courage, and representatives from the National Canine Memorial Foundation. They'd come to honor Diesel. A bronze plaque was mounted beside the memorial for David Frost and Garrett Stone Sr. It read simply, Diesel, military working dog, guardian of truth, faithful to the end. When the dedication was complete, Garrett knelt beside Diesel and clipped a new tag to his collar. It bore a single word engraved in simple letters, hero. Diesel sniffed it once, then looked at Garrett with what could only be described as amused tolerance, as if to say, I didn't do it for medals. I did it because it was right. Garrett smiled and scratched behind the dog's ears. I know, buddy, I know. That evening, Garrett sat on the cabin porch as the sun set over the mountains. Diesel lay beside him, head resting on Garrett's boot. Garrett pulled out an old letter. He'd found it in the Federal Archives Rachel had obtained. A letter his father had written but never sent. The envelope was addressed to Garrett, dated March 1999, 1 week before his father died. Garrett had read it 100 times, but tonight he read it again. Son, if you're reading this, the mission got me. Don't mourn. I chose this. Miracles aren't thunder from heaven. They're quiet things. A dog who refuses to quit. A son who finishes his father's work. The courage to stay when running is easier. Truth that outlives lies. Sarge will find you someday. I've made arrangements. When he does trust him, he sees what we miss. He remembers what we forget. In life, you'll face moments where duty costs everything, where standing alone feels impossible. That's when you look for the loyal ones, the ones who won't leave. I'm proud of you, son, not for what you've done, but for who you're becoming. Stay faithful. Stay true. Love, Dad. P.S. Diesel hates hot dogs. Don't ask me why. Just trust me on this one. Garrett smiled despite the tightness in his throat. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into his pocket. Then he looked at Diesel. You knew, didn't you? You knew I'd come. You waited 25 years. Diesel's tail thumped once against the wood. Garrett rested his hand on the dog's head. Mission complete, boy. You can rest now. But Diesel didn't close his eyes. He kept watching, still alert, still ready, because some loyalties don't retire. Some missions don't end. They just find new reasons to keep going. And sometimes the greatest miracle isn't the truth being found. It's the faithful companion who refuses to let it die. Garrett sat in silence as darkness fell. The stars came out one by one, filling the sky with ancient light. Somewhere in that vast expanse, his father's voice seemed to whisper on the wind. Not words, just a feeling. Well done. Garrett closed his eyes and let the peace settle over him like a blanket. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. Not gone, but bearable. And beside him, Diesel kept watch. Always faithful, always true. A compass that would never fail, pointing not toward north, but toward home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly. Through a dog that senses danger before flames rise. Through a man who finally listens to the signs he once ignored. Through a choice to do what is right when silence would be easier. Perhaps God does not always stop the fire. Perhaps he sends a warning instead. A feeling we cannot explain. A companion who refuses to move forward. A moment that asks us to slow down and pay attention. In our daily lives, we often rush past those moments. We ignore the small signs. We convince ourselves that silence is safer than truth. But as this story reminds us, doing the right thing, no matter how small, can save a life, heal a past, and change a future. Garrett Stone came to Montana to disappear. He found a rail car that wouldn't let him. He found a truth that demanded to be heard. And he found a body who'd been waiting 25 years for someone to listen. David Frost died protecting that truth. Garrett Stone Sr. died trying to help him. And Diesel spent a quarter century making sure their sacrifice wasn't forgotten. In your life, you'll face moments where truth costs everything, where standing alone feels impossible. That's when you look for the ones who won't leave. The loyal, the stubborn, the faithful. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that you are never truly alone. That even in the darkest woods, God may already be working ahead of you, placing guides along your path. Please take a moment to share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to you most. And if you believe in stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet miracles, subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking this journey together. May God bless you and protect you. May he guide your steps toward truth even when the path is steep. And may he place faithful companions beside you when you need them most. Because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't what we find, it's who finds us and refuses to let go. Amen.